So I'm Scott Jackson. I serve as the Mary Irene Ryan Executive Artistic Director of Shakespeare at Notre Dame, as well as I serve on the Moreau College Initiative steering committee as well. And Miles just so happens to be a graduate of that program, and with the very little bio that you gave me, I'll try to build on that a little bit. But Miles is a former prisoner turned advocate for criminal justice reform. He was sentenced to 36 years in prison at the age of 16. He transformed his life through education while he was inside. He was released in 2020, and he created an NGO, Invested Youth, upon his release. And in 2022, he graduated as valedictorian of Holy Cross College. So he's got a lot to say, and I'll just leave it there. But please welcome Miles Folsom.
Short bios, I'm a man of a few words. The best words I say maybe are the simplest. And so to start, more than anything, I just want to express what an honor it is to be here today to talk to the College of Arts and Letters. If this institution could be considered a body, and I say surely you are the soul of it. And so from my soul to yours, I hope that this hour that you've given me, that I can turn back around in 60 minutes and you can leave here with something greater, something more. And so as I did say, I'm going to leave some time at the end for questions. I'm certainly a very robust speaker, so if you got questions, don't be afraid to ask. If they're sensitive questions, we talk about prison, we talk about pain, trauma, it could be all sorts of things. Please ask them. Don't think that I have not answered it before. I've spoken all over the world, all over the U.S., high schools to universities, so if you got it, ask it. And I'm going to try to leave, a pretty sizable portion, so please, again, write it down. I'm going to start today by showing a video. In short, my life sucked. I can only say that so many different ways. And being a public speaker, gosh, I've said it a lot. So you have to forgive me. I'm going to sort of give you a recap, a synopsis of my life, if you will, through a short video that I put together and that I show as I go around talking. Then I'll sort of come back and highlight onto the points of it. And rather than just giving you sort of my life story as I've always done, I try to give each audience that I face something just a little different. My life in context with something, in context with incarceration, in context with the fight that we all sort of see as our men and women. They battle their vices, but then also as our colleagues sort of battle them, and battle in that fight to rehabilitate them. And so once through that, we'll come to the conclusion. But if we could just go to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, we're already there. Yeah, please enjoy it. It's about 5.5 minutes, and then I'll come back up.
Growing up, I never really realized the path that I was headed. It's not that I couldn't have seen it, but I just never took the time out, and it never really flashed for me. My name is Miles Folsom. I'm 17 years old, and I'm incarcerated at Wabash Valley Correctional Facility. Porter Circuit Court Judge Mary Harper sentenced Folsom to 36 years behind bars. Folsom was sentenced on felony robbery and criminal confinement charges for pistol whipping and robbing an acquaintance on March 20th. He was also sentenced for burglarizing the home in the Gaslight Mobile Home Park, October 30th, 2008. As a juvenile, at 16, I was immature. At 16, you just don't think right. You don't fully comprehend, all the weights that influence your life. There's so many things that are just outside of a 16-year-old's mind, and so I ended up in prison.
And the thing is that practically everyone around me was still ignorant, still doing all these things, fighting and just acting stupid, and it disgusted me to such a degree that I just pulled back from it all, and into my my cell, into my little world with all my pictures and quotes, and this is my space, this is my everything. And I just sat alone and thought, and thinking, in and of itself was a new thing to me. Thinking long and thinking deeply and putting, a thought up on the blackboard of my mind and just picking it apart and having hours and hours and weeks and months to do it. This experience and receiving such a large sentence has been, I must be like the most unfortunate man in the world. If we could travel back in time and put me next to, the 16-year-old me, you might not even think we were brothers. The difference would be so drastic. I started this process sitting alone in a cell at 16, wondering why I was doing the things that I was doing and trying to understand it. And so then I just proceeded with this gigantic, criticism of who I was in my past and trying to understand myself and my emotions and just analyzing why I was doing these things. And a lot of it didn't make sense. And then I started thinking about my emotions. Why did I feel this way? And so by coming to understand myself, in such a complete way, I began to understand the world. I began, by understanding myself, I began to understand people and, the love of humanity and how we were all connected. And that just, I can't, it didn't open a door, it opened a world, a universe.
So with this court date only being hours away, I feel terrified. I don't know if you can really prepare for it. I sort of, there's some post within me that I grab onto, and then I hold on to it for dear life. And holding on to that immovable post helps me to get towards these things. But this hearing, I'm going to be cross-examined. My life is going to be examined. I'm going to have to go argue issues. And I don't know. I feel like I've really just been dragged to this date. No doubt I wanted to be here and to it, but it's such a scary thing. Your life is in the balance, and you really have virtually no control over it.
Dream big. Believe in yourself. Believe that you can do anything you want to. Look back at history. Anything that ever happened, you can do. You are not limited by anything but your own mind. And I would hope, standing here today, speaking this truth, you would believe it, because I have performed it. And I accept this medal for the valedictorian. But I'm afraid I accept it conditionally. I accept it not on my own behalf, but I accept it as a symbol for all the underdogs in the world, for everyone who thinks that they can't get up, that the door is shut, and that life is over. I accept it as a symbol for them, so that they may know a ray of hope in the darkness.
So, my name is Miles Folsom. I had a rough life. My first experience with incarceration came at the age of 9 years old. Why that is so significant, at least for this talk, is because what I'm going to introduce to you is sort of the idea of incarceration and what an idea can do to a mind, your mind, a group of minds, whatever it may be. And so at 9, I was handcuffed. I was locked in the back of a police car. An officer rightfully screamed in my face, and then I was taken off to a juvenile detention center, almost with no talk, no discussion with my parents or what was going on or why I was sort of just thrown into this. Obviously, I had committed a crime. I had stole something. At 9 years old, what I had stole, I didn't really know. I was out with a friend. It was sort of us running around, causing a muck. But at 9 years old, as I sat in that cell that night crying, trying to understand what the hell had gone wrong, what I knew, though, is that from then forward I would be different. And I would be different not only because the concept of confinement and the restriction of freedom had been pressed onto my 9-year-old soul, but because of the crime that I had committed and the sort of news that it made became such a thing that when I went back to school on Monday, only having spent the night in lockup, all the kids in my class looked at me and they said, "We can't play with you anymore. You're a bad kid." Or my mom said I have to stay away from you. Now again, as a 9-year-old boy, I didn't quite understand that. What do you understand at 9, other than enjoyment, play? What I understood, the irons, the marks that were being pressed against me, that I would then have to view my world through as the years went on. And at 9, what I had done is I had stole a chemical from a water treatment facility. I'd slipped in the back. It was on the edge of town. We were walking through the woods, and I saw a bottle that had the old Jolly Roger skull and crossbones on it, real big. So hell, 9-year-old, call it curiosity. Maybe curiosity is the appropriate thing, because what that bottle of liquid turned out to be was one of the deadliest chemicals that I have ever and will ever possess in my life. It was so deadly that they use it in parts per million to clean the wastewater before it's returned to your tap. And what they told me is that I just take it home and just poured it down the drain, I would have killed everybody who drank the water in the town. Because not even the facility itself could filter out the poison in such concentration. And so the seriousness of it almost made me out to look as if I were a terrorist at 9 years old. This is the sort of news reports that went on. So from there, at 9, as I began to wrangle with these ideas of terrorism, mass death, incarceration, being a criminal, I got nowhere. All these words, all these labels that swirled around me, they meant nothing to my 9-year-old mind. At best, maybe what you could have got through to me was good versus bad. And surely my parents, they would have tried that. I'm sure they did. Don't do this, this is bad, Miles. Unfortunately, my parents, they weren't experts of communication. You know, some of you may recollect that your own parents, or maybe your parenting, or your brother's parenting, or your sister's. Not everybody communicates in the same way. I come from a low economic family. You know, we got by just above the poverty line. My parents, they didn't go to college. They didn't often talk about things. You know, they showed their love, their family by being there. My parents were always there, you know, and I thank God for that. But they couldn't communicate to me certain things that were beyond their understanding, beyond their even vocabularies. My parents, they weren't criminals at all. They hadn't been locked up. They didn't use drugs. You know, maybe my dad drank a little bit and got a little out of hand, but certainly they did not think about crimes. They did not fantasize about them. They did not go out and steal things. So when it came to try and help their 9-year-old boy who had gotten hooked by this vice, this programming of take, reward, take again, reward, they were incapable. They simply did not have the words. And the words that I had, criminal, terrorist, right, wrong, they were just as empty, to be honest. They didn't mean anything. You could have told Miles this is a bad thing. You could have slapped me on the wrist. You could have whooped me. And it didn't matter because I couldn't understand what you were saying. So from there, you know, good, bad, it turned to right to wrong. Right to wrong came with the justice system. Rather than good and bad, which are sort of qualities, they said, well, this is right and this is wrong. And you're doing the wrong thing. And again, you know, maybe the vocabulary slowly started to change from good to bad to right to wrong. But the words were just as empty as they had ever been to me. Didn't know why, didn't think about it, why would I think about it? So now again, I just continue on into this sort of habit that I'm building for myself, and this indifference to all these words that people are trying to give to me. And so at 9, I would say that my fight had no name. You know, maybe you'd say that it was bad or it was wrong. Those are the things that I was fighting. I was fighting the bad, I was fighting the wrong, but it all felt empty. So really it just felt as if I was fighting myself because nobody could really identify what it was that I was going through, why Miles was different, why he was acting different, why he was acting, different from all these other kids. Nobody could identify it for me. This thing that had gotten into my mind sort of started to seed itself. They couldn't. They couldn't separate me from it. And so I was the problem. Simply because they couldn't communicate it to me, I concluded that I was the problem. And it's very hard to fix a problem when that's your perspective. And so the words, they changed as I grew older. Good, bad, right, wrong, victim, defendant. They grew more sophisticated, as did my crimes, from petty theft to burglary to harming another person, to pistol whipping somebody with a handgun that I'd stolen from a house. My criminality and the words used to describe it in me grew more and more sophisticated. And as they did, I still didn't understand them. At 15 years old, sitting across from a public defender telling me that the mandatory minimum on these crimes were 6 years, 6 years, 6 years, 25 years, 25 years, until she told me I was facing 118 years as a 16-year-old. The sophistication of it was always beyond my adolescent mind. Even at that age, even in all these different steps, from good to bad, right to wrong, defendant, victim, you name it. It was hard for me to make that connection, that jump. And as I grew older, it grew even harder, almost as if I were becoming more and more of an island, sort of drifting from the shore. And the farther I got, the worse I got, the more violent I got, the deeper that criminality set, as if the separation in itself was only an accelerant. Almost just as bad as finding a partner in crime was not finding a friend. Almost as bad as finding a partner in crime was not finding a friend. And so ultimately I went to prison, 36 years. Got there when I was 16. I was moved to the adult side of a maximum security prison the day before my 18th birthday. So on my 18th birthday, I woke up in general population in a maximum security prison. This is where we put the worst offenders in our society. The worst people, the worst crimes you have ever heard of. This is where we put them. It's a maximum security facility. Unfortunately, we also put everyone else there who has more than 10 years to serve. So I was given 36 years for a violent crime that I committed when I was 16. Somebody stole something from me. Out of retaliation, I went and assaulted him. I robbed him for drugs. And I was given a large sentence, not necessarily simply because of the severity of that one crime, but because from the age of 9 until 15, I was a thorn in the side of the justice system. I could not get right. I kept stealing. I kept vandalizing. I kept lying. I kept breaking probation, so that eventually, by the time they sentenced me for armed robbery, my criminal history, they said, deserved the exact same sentence. I was given 18 years on that armed robbery, and it was aggravated up to 36 because of my criminal history, because of the confusion that I had had in my mind, because of the poverty that I lived in, the lack of communication in my world. My sentence was doubled to 36, and I was sent to the worst place that we house people in the state of Indiana. And the shame of it, I wasn't alone in that. Yeah, I woke up every day and I witnessed atrocities. I mean, maybe not atrocities, but boy, the inhumanity that I had to live with as an 18-year-old would shock and shame every one of you to know that we as a society send our people there, send people still with so much hope, so much light into the abyss. Because I woke up and I had to face serial killers, violent sexual predators every day at breakfast. I woke up when I was 18 and the only thing that I thought about was having to kill a man to survive. Was thinking that somebody was going to come and try and rape me. They were going to try and test me.
because I was 18, because I had long hair, because I didn't want tattoos. You can't see it today, I don't have a single tattoo on my body. Because I didn't want to join a white supremacist gang for protection. Because white people in Indiana, if you want gang protection, the gang you join has some affiliation with white supremacy. You can't just join a gang as a white guy and it not be racist. So there is no protection for the conscientious person going into prison. You either bow to the degradation and the disgust that's there, or you stand alone. And I'll tell you, I stood alone. And my story is so remarkable because I stood alone. And it was because I stood alone that I was able to separate myself from the chaos of that environment. The drug use, the abuse, the violence, the aggression, the gangs, being robbed, you name it. I was able to separate myself from that and say, that's not what I want. I learned my lesson going to prison. And unfortunately, I learned it by violence. The consequences in the beginning, as I was a juvenile, they were too small for me to recalibrate my reward system. Going to juvie for a day or two or a week didn't really mean anything to me. My life had already metered out harsher punishments than the justice system could give me. And so, by the time that a 36-year sentence broke through that hard head of mine, I was already too far gone. So I stood there in prison at 18, and I decided to refashion my life. And rather than seeing my cell door as something that was bad, something that to be afraid of, I saw it as almost a doorway to my sanctuary, somewhere where I could trap myself into a box, which I held the dimensions of. I knew exactly what would happen in it. I knew how to turn the light on. I knew when the water came. I knew when the lock shut and no one would come through it. And I knew when it opened and when I had to be on guard. And that doorway turned to me symbolically, almost as if it were the gate to hell. Walking out of that doorway into the day room is where the trouble really began. And so I refused it like a recluse. And I drove myself inside that cell. And I said, what can I change from here? What can I change about myself? Because I tell you, one of the most desperate things about a situation like that is that there is no rehabilitation. It's a joke. The maximum security prison, it's a joke. They'll have a program for you to go do, kind of stay busy. Most guys don't even bother. They're going to die there. They have decades. So they wake up, and they're just on bullshit. That's it. They live their lives getting high, playing cards, watching sports, playing basketball in a world that you can just not even imagine. One of the most shocking things to me about being sent to prison, especially at a young age, is I was kind of short-sighted. I thought that I was going there to get better, that there would be something great for me there, some programming, some open arms. And when I got there, it wasn't anything like that. It was terrible, and I had to get it my own. And why I stand here today, why I can make it through these doors, and all my brothers and sisters, the 2.3 million who are still just dying in those cells, why they can't, is because they didn't make that same refusal. They didn't turn in on themselves, and rather than attacking others, attacking their own problems. And I did, and in doing that, I learned something great about the power of words and being able to tell a story. It took me a tremendous amount of learning to rehabilitate, to restore my fallen self. It didn't come through college education necessarily. It didn't come through a class. It didn't even come through any particular one person. I learned in every field that I could, whether that was neurology, astrophysics, calculus, geology, geography, humanity, literature. Because once I got in that cell and I asked, what can I do in this cell to change anything? I realized
that the only thing I could change was myself. And what little resources I did have, I had to capitalize. And those were books. Thank God those were books. And so every day, I began to just devour books, one after the other. And it didn't really matter what book it was. Although I had a prohibition, unless they were classics, I would not read nonfiction. So it had to be genuine knowledge, it had to be information, or it had to be so old that referencing that information had a value in and of itself. And so from day to day, I read and read and read. I gave away my TV because it interfered with my reading. I would keep my celly up. I'd feed him free coffee. You don't give things away for free. I'd be charitable just so I could go on reading longer. I would wake up, I'd read. I'd sleep. I'd wake up again, I'd read. One year, I read over 100 books, non-stop, from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And I learned a great amount about myself, about my emotions, about others. I learned that I wasn't alone in joining that massive group. And what I learned, though, is that I could sit here today and I could tell you about neurology. I could tell you about a neuron. I could tell you about the dendrites. I could tell you about how memories are formed in those sort of electro-organic channels. How the mind sort of pulses throughout and can invoke and grab these things. How your emotions will sort of bury a treasure in a memory. It's as if we walk through the world and our senses, like LiDAR, map out everything in our minds. And then your emotions sort of write on it and mark each point as, however significant it may have been. And then your mind catalogs it so it can go back and grab it. And so I learned about these neurons and these memories and how they store so that I could come to understand sort of this PTSD that I was experiencing. These strong urges to commit crimes. I needed to understand how to come out of these channels of habits that were formed so deeply in my adolescence when emotions, would just overflow. As a child, when something good happens, you just feel it exudes. It's so true, it's so genuine. And the same thing is true for children who commit crimes without knowing that they're crimes. When I take a pack of gum and I get that elation, from how good it is. Well, it's very similar to the nature of a child picking an apple from a tree. Nothing in that child nature says, that's not your gum, you can't eat it. God made the earth, He made the food, He made the trees, and in the beginning, you could take from nature, it was given to you. But see, children in that child nature, that sort of intuitive nature, they don't have that. It's not complicated. It's very simple. And so learning about the sophistication of neurology, my mind, these memories, how to overcome them, I realized that I was never going to be able to talk to other prisoners about it. Yeah, and damn it if I didn't try to explain neurology to another guy, to try to tell him, PTSD, that memory, well, listen, this is how you override it. Let me tell you, the channels, they're just very large. The millivolts that are pushing through are great. The action hillock that confines your resting potential, but let me tell you, in this instance, it's real low. So that memory, it sparks up like gasoline every time because you have no electrical resistance to getting to it. You have to build the hill. Silence, crickets. You can see the dead look in someone's eyes, as they lose attention, and you just realize, man, I should just shut up. It was like that every time, and it was a barrier for me because I spent my time incarcerated trying to help people. Because quickly after spending all that time investing in myself and reading, what I realized is that, the greatest way to make a great me is to go around making great people. That by helping others, truly, that's where I would find, my happiness. And it took that initial investment to get there, but I realized, quickly that investing in myself, it paid off less and less as you went on.
and then I had to turn to others. And in turning to others, I felt this resistance, this over-sophistication that I had created in my mind as I sought out, the ends to my problems. And so, with that barrier faced, I wondered, how then can this be of any good? Yes, maybe I can go to a conference of neurologists and I can talk about it. Well, they'll tell me I probably didn't even say it well enough. But how can I take this great knowledge and how can I give it back? And I began to realize a lesson that I overlooked in the beginning of my education. I can't recall the professor, but he had us read a work by G.K. Chesterton, and it was called, or maybe it was an article in it, but it was called Science and Religion. And what G.K. Chesterton was trying to get across in this piece of writing is that science is sort of the new mythology. When we think of ourselves as being so smart in the modern world that we don't believe in mythology anymore, and some people don't even believe in religion. We just believe in science. What Chesterton was trying to get at was that really we have sort of just given everything a new name. That science is religion. It was religion. That before science came along, we were all religious and we understood things about the natural world, and those things just kind of fit into our frameworks of religion, and everything was okay. But then, at some point, we became very sophisticated. It went from good and bad, or good versus evil, to right and wrong. And in that sophistication, all we did was search out to define the natural world. Science is a searching of definitions. That's it. The whole catalog of a scientific database is a searching of definitions. But, God, did we put a lot of time into it, right? Just to prove what was true. God, did it get so complicated just trying to prove what was true? Science isn't saying anything that's not there, anything that doesn't exist. It's simply putting a name to things. And some scientific things are hard to understand. Some things like rehabilitation, recidivism. These are the sophisticated terms of today's science. And they are the things that are hard to understand. They're hard to understand even for me, I'm sure for you. What is recidivism? What is rehabilitation? What does it even look like? Right, I say these words and they are as empty to you maybe as good and bad were to me at 9 years old. They just don't have that connection that they need. And this sort of disconnect was the same thing that I faced when trying to explain to prisoners why they were making these mistakes, why their minds and their hearts drove them to these ends. So what I found, though, in pushing that sort of thread forward, is that if I tried to tell a man that if he did something once and twice and 2 times over, that the pathway in his mind would enlarge him. And not only would it enlarge him, but the electrical resistance would lessen because he had done that thing multiple times. When I tried to explain that, it wouldn't go. So then I thought to myself, I thought back to sort of On the Nature of Things by Lucretius, and how these ancient philosophers could explain the natural world, not exactly, but they could do it without all our modern scientific terms. I wondered, how did these ancient philosophers get a hold of the world without science? What words did they use? On the Nature of Things is a great example. You can look back, you can see how man describes these phenomena in the world. And I found a power in that simplicity. And it was maybe Da Vinci that sparked the idea that there could be power in that simplicity, because what Da Vinci said was that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Just meaning that if you really want to be sophisticated, if you really want to be smart, you just have to be simple. And that's where you find your home. And so rather than trying to explain neurology, what I realized is that I could take my knowledge of science, of these
very complicated processes. And I could turn them back into simple stories. Almost like I could turn them back into myths. Except now, I knew the origin of the signs and the symbols in the myth. And so, rather than talking about electricity, what I found was helpful was when I sat down with somebody and I said, "Hey, have you ever been, to the woods? You ever been to the forest?" And he was like, "Yeah." I said, "Well, you walked on a trail?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, well, just imagine a forest. And there's one trail. And you're going to walk into that forest. Are you just going to walk through the brush? Are you going to just push through all the bushes and the thorns to make your own way? Or, naturally, without even thinking, are you just going to walk the path?" And they said, "Oh, well, sure, I would walk the path." I said, "Okay, phenomenal. This is where we start. If you didn't walk that path for the next 10 days, 100 days, what would the forest look like? Would the path be retaken by nature? Would things come back? Would it be harder to walk that same path if you left it alone?" And they would say, "Oh, yes, of course." I said, "Great. This pathway through the woods is just like the neural pathways of your mind. And that path there is to a place that you've made a habit. And if you decide not to walk down that path, nature will take the habit from you. It will grow back onto it, and it will reclaim it into the woods as if it never existed. And the same thing can be said for your mind and the neuroplasticity of it. That if you stop a habit, slowly, the energy will stop being sent into it. The action hillock that protects its resting potential will rise. So it takes more effort to invoke that habit, to invoke that memory, to invoke that response. So it's almost as if by desisting, getting away from doing something, literally, it will make it harder to go back to it. And in that way, the value of stopping something and getting away from it can be demonstrated, but it can be demonstrated in almost like a fable-like story. Because what I find is that, here today, I started off as a specimen in the justice system at the age of 9. Here I am today, a scientist. I'm a scientist, much like many of you, in that we have the language, we have the terminology, we have the knowledge of these sophisticated systems and how some of these things work. We have the word recidivism, rehabilitation, reform. But we can't relay it to the people who need it most. Because they are not scientists. They don't share this newfound language of our modern era. These are people who, more than half of them, don't even have a high school education, never graduated. And what I find most is that these people, they're not in need of science. They're not in need of these highfalutin terms and all these new vocabularies. They're in need of that old archetypal language of nature, of trees, of being able to explain all our sophisticated natural processes in signs and symbols that are natural to life. Because it is life that is the substrate that we share in communicating. So much of your experiences are going to be different from mine and the rest of the people that are incarcerated. And it's going to be hard to even share your education, your travels of the world. But if you can take it back to that archetypal imagery, and if you can construct it in such a way as that it's honest, it's real, the data is behind it, they receive it far more graciously than any other information you attempt to give them. And once I made that breakthrough, I was really able to embody my role as a leader on the inside. I was really able to understand that there's just this great spectrum of life. And despite how far ahead of ourselves that we get, and how smart the smartest person is in the world, or how far the furthest satellite is, I realized that in understanding that simplicity of life that pervades us, it never goes away. It's almost as if, I forget his name, but it was the discourse of language, and he theorized that the original language is always still with us in the onomatopoeias. The O's, the that the original language, that they were onomatopoeia words. They were that small, before they advanced and sophisticated. They were the shouts that everybody understood, whether you were, from Asia or South America. When somebody was happy, you could see it. When they were sad, you could see it. Those things, no matter what, that primal language, whether it's verbal or whether it's pictorial, they stick with us. They are the fundamental thing that we all live on. And so oftentimes what I saw in rehabilitation were people getting too far out with the new research, with the new data. They just didn't realize how lonely. I sat down and I gave them my time and attention and care. And I cared to respond with kind stories, fables even, to try and demonstrate these points. They received it. Not only did they receive it, my God, they responded to me as if I were the only person in life that had given them that charity. I mean, my God, I cry about it when I'm alone. To think that maybe those people aren't there, but the scenario still exists. That those people still suffer there in silence. And so, this is one story. This is my story about incarceration. But what I hope to try to get across to you is that really there is only one story in incarceration currently, and it's the scientific story. It is the rehabilitation. It is the recidivism. And we're failing greatly. Recidivism, the chance that somebody returns nationally, 70% over 5 years. 5 years, 70% of our citizens go back. We run these institutions. We support them. We allow them to exist. And they are failing greatly. And I feel that it is my duty in life, my job, to spread this message. A little late on the last slide, guys. I think I'll end it there. Thank you for your time.